Some truths arrive like weather. You feel them coming in your bones before they reach you. Adaeze Okafor had felt this one building for 11 months. The way certain silences had a different quality than before. The way her husband moved through their Hyundai apartment like a man who had already left it in his mind and was simply waiting for his body to catch up. The late evenings that became late nights that became next mornings, each one arriving with an explanation that was technically plausible and fundamentally wrong. She had cataloged all of it, every displaced detail, every missed dinner, every conversation he ended by looking at his phone. And she had done what she always did with evidence she was not ready to act on. She filed it quietly and kept loving him, kept showing up, kept being the woman she had always been, which was the kind of woman who finished things she had started. She had started this marriage with everything she had. Adaeze had come to Busan 4 years ago following her father, Dr. Emmanuel Okafor, who had been appointed to lead a joint South Korean and Nigerian research initiative at Busan National University. An infectious disease specialist with 40 years of practice and the warm exact manner of a man who had spent his career turning terrifying diagnoses into survivable ones, her father had taken the position at 62 because he believed in the work. Adaeze had come with him because she believed in her father. She had been 28 midway through her doctorate in biomedical ethics, and the opportunity to finish it at one of Asia's most respected universities had been too precisely aligned with her ambitions to decline. Her mother, Gloria Okafor, a retired professor of African literature who had published 4 books and raised one daughter to be twice as formidable as herself, had come with the same combination of reluctance and openness that characterized everything Gloria did. She had packed her books, her Ankara fabric, her collection of Fela Kuti recordings, and her opinion on every subject, and she had arrived in Busan ready to be interested in it. Busan had been startling and layered and good. The sea, the light on the water in the morning, the fish markets at dawn, the city's specific version of beautiful, which was not delicate but alive. Big hills and working port, and streets that ran steep and turned unexpected, and made you understand that this place had a personality before you arrived and would have one after you left. She had met Lee Jun-seo at a departmental reception in her second month. He was Korean, broad-shouldered, meticulous in his dress, with the kind of considered stillness that reads as depth until you understand it well enough to know it is actually control. He was a senior finance executive at a Busan-based shipping conglomerate, 34. He had approached her after her brief introduction and said with the precise interest of a man who was never unintentional, "I understand you are working in biomedical ethics. That must require extraordinary precision with language." It had been the right thing to say to her. She had responded with genuine engagement, and he had listened with genuine engagement, and they had talked for 2 hours at a reception neither of them had wanted to attend. She told her parents about him that night. Her father had set down his reading glasses. Her mother had said, "Describe his eyes." Adaeze had laughed. "His eyes are very focused, Mama." Gloria had nodded slowly. Focused eyes can be a virtue or a warning, the same quality. She had taken that with her, as she took most things her mother said. For a year, Jun-seo gave her no reason to find the warning in it. He courted her with the same measured deliberateness with which he appeared to do everything, consistently, attentively, without theatrics. He sat at her parents' dinner table and spoke respectfully to her father about research, and listened carefully to her mother discuss Chinua Achebe. He learned a small number of Igbo phrases with genuine effort. He met her precisely where she had set the standard, which was high. When he proposed, he did it on a quiet Sunday morning on Hyundai Beach at low tide, the sea pulling back from the sand, the light flat and honest and not performing anything. He held the ring out and said, "I have watched you move through the world with more integrity than anyone I have ever known, Adaeze. I want to spend my life being worthy of that." She had stood there in the early morning light with the sea behind her and felt something settle inside her. Not the reckless bloom of young love, but the deep, deliberate conviction of a woman who had examined a thing from every angle and found it sound. She said yes. Her father cried at the wedding. Her mother danced. The first year of marriage was what she had expected it to be. Not effortless, because she had never been naive about what marriage required, but genuinely good. Shijun Seo was present and attentive and interested. Their Hyundai apartment was beautiful, a ninth-floor unit overlooking the sea with a particular quality of light in the evenings that made it feel like the world was conspiring to be good to them. She finished her doctorate. He supported it entirely. He attended her defense and sat in the back row, and when she walked out with the result she had spent 3 years earning, he was already standing with his arms open. She thought about that moment sometimes in the months that followed, when things had already started to change. The man in that doorway, the man with open arms, and the man who now came home late and smelling like someone else. She would try to reconcile them and find that she could not. They did not fit in the same person. And yet they were. When that was the thing that took the longest to accept. Not the betrayal exactly, but the coexistence of the man she had known and the man he had apparently always been underneath. The performance had been so complete, so sustained. She found herself in the worst hours auditing her own intelligence, reviewing every moment, every conversation, looking for the thing she should have seen. Her mother had said, "Focused eyes can be a virtue or a warning." She had seen the virtue. She had not looked past it. Then the second year arrived and the building stopped. It happened the way erosion happens, not violently but consistently, each day removing a small layer, until one morning you look at what remains and can no longer see the original shape. He came home later. He answered questions with less. He stopped asking about her work, her writing, her thoughts, the things that had initially drawn him to her. He started taking calls in the bathroom with the door locked. He started smelling like someone else. She had confronted him 3 times. Each time he had been technically responsive and fundamentally dishonest, explaining without illuminating, addressing without answering. Each time he had ended the conversation by simply removing himself from the room, and she had stood alone in the beautiful apartment they had built together and felt the ground shifting beneath it. The night it ended came on a Thursday in October with no particular warning. Adaeze was at her desk working when she heard the front door open. She heard his voice. Then she heard a second voice, female, unhurried, speaking Korean with the relaxed ease of someone at home. She set her pen down. She stood. No, she walked to the living room doorway and stopped. A woman she had never seen before was standing in the center of her living room. She was Korean, exceptionally beautiful in the specific way that was designed to be observed, dressed in something expensive and deliberate. She stood with the easy confidence of a person who had been in this space before and expected to be in it again. She did not look uncomfortable. She did not look apologetic. She looked like someone who had arrived where she was going. Adaeze looked at her husband. Lee Jun-seo set his keys on the counter. He did not look at Adaeze with guilt. He looked at her with the flat, preemptive irritation of a man who has already decided how this conversation will go and is impatient to finish it. "Who is she, Jun-seo?" "Her name is Sarah." He said it without inflection, and without apology, without even the basic courtesy of facing her fully. "Pack what you need tonight. I want you out of this apartment." The sentence arrived in her body before her mind could process it. She felt it in her hands first, a faint, involuntary tremor that she stilled immediately. She was not going to shake in front of this woman. "I am your wife," she said. Her voice was level. He looked at her then, directly without flinching. "You are my soon-to-be former wife. The paperwork will be handled. Take what belongs to you and leave tonight." Adaeze stood in her living room, in her home, in the marriage she had built with full conviction and total faithfulness, and looked at the man she had chosen and understood, with the devastating clarity of a woman whose mind never stopped working, that there was no conversation left to have here. He had already made every decision. She was simply the last scene of an arrangement he had already concluded in his mind. She turned and walked to the bedroom. She took her passport, her hard drives, her mother's photograph from the nightstand, and the small leather pouch of things she kept for emergencies that her mother had given her when she left Lagos as a young woman. She did not take her wedding photograph. She looked at it once and left it on the wall. She walked back through the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch now. Jun-seo was in the kitchen with his back to the door. Adaeze stopped at the threshold. She did not cry. She did not plead. She looked at the apartment one final time. The bookshelves she had organized, The framed photographs from their first year, the dinner table where her parents had sat and laughed and eaten her cooking, and she breathed it all in like a final paragraph. Then she walked out and the door closed behind her with a quiet, unremarkable click. The Hyundai night was cold. October in Busan had a particular chill that came off the water and carried the smell of the sea in it, and Adaeze stood on the pavement outside her building with a shoulder bag and her whole collapsed life inside her chest and tried to decide which direction to walk. Her parents' apartment was in Namgu, 40 minutes by bus. She had her phone. She could call, but she stood on the pavement for a long moment first, in the cold sea air, breathing slowly, because she needed to know that she could stand here alone and not fall. She was standing in the road when the SUV hit her. It was not the driver's fault, and it was not entirely her fault. She had stepped from the pavement without looking, her mind still in the apartment behind her, and the vehicle had come around the corner of the narrow Hyundai street too fast for either of them to respond. The impact was not at full speed, but it was enough. She was on the ground before she understood she had been struck. The wet pavement against her cheek was cold. The last thing she registered before the darkness was the sound of a car door opening and a voice deep and commanding, saying something in Korean she could not translate, and then nothing. And the private hospital in Hyundai occupied the top 3 floors of a building that did not advertise itself. No large sign, no visible emergency entrance, nothing to suggest to the ordinary street that anything significant happened inside it. Kwon Jae-hyun had brought people to this building before. He had never carried one through the front door himself. He was 41. In Busan's various difficult communities, he was known by a name that preceded him into rooms. Not in the way celebrity precedes famous people, but in the way reputation precedes dangerous ones. He ran a network of businesses that occupied the profitable gray space between legal and not, managed with the cold precision of a man who had built everything he had from nothing and understood, at a molecular level, what it cost to maintain it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of physicality that was less about size than about absolute presence. Star tattoos at his collar, dragon tattoos across his hands, the ink so detailed it moved when he moved. Dark eyes that were habitually unreadable. Not because he was hiding things, but because he had learned early that a man whose eyes revealed nothing held all the power in every room. He had been in the back seat reviewing quarterly figures when his driver took the corner too fast, and they heard the impact and felt it simultaneously. He had already opened his door before the car fully stopped. His head of security, a compact and lethal Korean man named Director Woo, who had been beside him for 9 years, had said, "Sir, we should not." Kwon Jae-hyun had not waited for the rest of the sentence. She was on the ground in the way people are when their body has stopped protecting itself. Loose, wrong, the shoulder bag still attached to her arm, as if she'd been holding it when she fell. He crouched beside her and checked her pulse first. Present, irregular. And then he lifted her from the pavement with a care that surprised his own driver, who had seen this man do many things and had never used the word gentle to describe any of them. He told Director Wu to call Dr. Kang. He told his driver to go. At the hospital, he stood in the corridor outside her room for 4 hours. Director Wu stood beside him without speaking, which was one of the qualities that had made him irreplaceable for 9 years. The ability to read when silence was the only appropriate response to a situation. Dr. Kang came out at 2 in the morning. Concussion, a cracked rib, deep bruising of the shoulder and hip. She is stable. She was fortunate. Another 10 kilometers of speed, and this is a different conversation. Kwon Jae-hyun nodded once. She stays here until she is fully discharged. Everything she needs. Dr. Kang looked at him with the carefully neutral expression of a man who had worked in this building long enough to not ask questions. Of course, he returned the next morning, and the morning after. Director Wu, on the 3rd day, said, "Boss, who is this woman to you?" Kwon Jae-hyun straightened his jacket. "Someone who needed help." "You have never done this." He looked at his associate evenly. "I am doing it now." Director Wu did not press further, but he watched. He noticed that his boss, who had never sat in a hospital corridor for anyone, who had never paid medical bills for a stranger, and who conducted his entire life with the precise emotional management of a chess player, had been sitting in this corridor every morning for 3 days running and showed no sign of stopping. Adaeze woke on the second day to unfamiliar light and the smell of antiseptic and the particular disorientation of consciousness returning to a body that has been through something. She lay very still first, taking inventory, limbs present, head aching, the specific deep pain of a bruised rib when she breathed. Then the previous night assembled itself in her memory piece by piece, the way bad things do, slowly and without mercy. The apartment, Jun Seo, the woman standing in her living room, the door, the street, the impact. A nurse appeared and told her she was safe, told her who had brought her in. Oh, Adaeze lay looking at the ceiling for a long time after the nurse left, trying to understand the shape of where she had landed. She called her parents from the hospital phone on day 3. Her mother picked up on the first ring. Gloria Okafor always picked up on the first ring. She believed that letting a phone ring more than twice was a form of indifference she refused to practice. "Mama," her voice came out smaller than she intended. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Where are you, my daughter?" Not a question, a direction. She told her mother the hospital name. She heard Gloria say something to her father in a voice that was controlled and terrifying, in the specific way that a Gloria Okafor, who was holding her emotions in check, was always more frightening than one who was not. She heard her father's voice in the background, steady, immediate, the doctor in him already assessing. "We are coming," her mother said. "Do not move." On the 4th morning, Kwon Jae-hyun was in the corridor when a woman came through the hospital entrance who moved like a force of nature in a tailored coat. She was Nigerian, 50-something, dark-skinned, with natural silver-streaked hair pulled back from a face that was deeply beautiful and entirely commanding. She walked with the posture of a woman who had never in her life waited for permission to enter a space. Behind her, a tall Nigerian man in his 60s with reading glasses around his neck and the careful, measured bearing of a doctor. They were Adaeze's parents. He had already determined this. He had spent 3 days learning who she was. Not intrusively, not with surveillance, but with the basic research of a man who needed to understand the full shape of what had happened on his watch. He knew about Dr. Emmanuel Okafor and his research position. He knew about the marriage to Lee Jun Seo and the circumstances under which it had ended that night. Gloria Okafor stopped when she saw him. She took him in fully. The height, the tailored suit, the tattoos at his collar and across his hands. With the quick, comprehensive intelligence of a woman who assessed people rapidly and accurately. "You are the man who brought my daughter here," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. She studied him for another moment. Then she extended her hand. "Gloria Okafor, this is my husband, Emmanuel. You have my family's gratitude." He shook her hand. "Kwon Jae-hyun, doctor." Okafor looked at him with the additional layer of appraisal that fathers apply to men in proximity to their daughters. He extended his hand. "She is well?" "She is well. Stable since the first night." Emmanuel nodded slowly. "Then, come inside with us." It was not a request. Kwon Jae-hyun recognized the quality of voice, the one that was framed as an invitation, but carried the weight of a decision already made. He recognized it because he used that voice himself. He followed them in. When Adaeze saw her mother appear in the doorway of her hospital room, something in her chest that had been locked since Thursday night unlocked entirely. Gloria crossed the room in 3 steps and gathered her daughter in both arms and held her without saying anything for a long time. Adaeze pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and breathed her in. Shea butter and sandalwood and the specific warmth that had been home her entire life, and allowed herself finally the full weight of everything she had been carrying. Her father sat beside the bed and held her hand and said nothing for a while, which was its own kind of language. When Gloria finally spoke, she did not offer careful consolations. She looked at her daughter and said, "You did nothing wrong. Say that back to me." "I did nothing wrong," Adaeze said. The words were harder than the steadiness suggested. Gloria held her face in both hands. "No, you did not. You loved someone who was not capable of receiving it. That is his failure. Do you understand the difference?" Adaeze looked at her mother. When she thought about all the hours in the past week she had spent auditing herself, reviewing every decision, searching for the fault line in herself that had allowed this. The fault line she kept looking for was not hers. She understood that now, in this room with her mother's hands on her face. Yes, she said, I understand. Good. Gloria released her and sat back with the composure of a woman who had said the necessary thing and was now prepared to move forward. Tell me about the man who brought you here. Later, when Adaeze had been examined and settled and given food and tea, her father stood in the corridor with Kwon Jae-hyun and told him what Adaeze had told them about the night she was discharged from her marriage. Kwon Jae-hyun listened without interruption. When Emmanuel finished, he looked at this man whose reputation in Busan he was aware of. You could not live in this city for 3 years without becoming aware of it, and said, You have taken extraordinary care of my daughter. I want to know why. Kwon Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. The corridor was quiet around them. Because she was alone on the ground in the cold, he said, and I put her there. He paused, and because there was something in her face, even unconscious, that made it impossible to drive away. Emmanuel Okafor looked at him for a long time with those steady, diagnostic eyes that had been reading people for 40 years. Come to dinner tomorrow, he said. My wife will cook. Adaeze will be home. Kwon Jae-hyun looked at him. All right, he said. He came to dinner. He sat at the Okafor's Namgu dining table in a home that was entirely unlike any room he inhabited. Warm, full of books and fabric, and the smell of jollof rice, and the accumulated evidence of a family that had loved each other loudly for decades. Gloria put food in front of him and watched him eat with the assessing eyes of a woman who believed that how a person received hospitality revealed everything about who they were. Adaeze sat across from him, still moving carefully because of the rib, and studied him with the same forensic intelligence he had noticed in her from the first moment she was conscious. She was even more striking than the photograph his inquiries had produced. Not in a way that was decorative, but in a way that was present, fully in the room, looking at things directly. She said halfway through dinner, while in a voice that was entirely conversational, I am told your car is what struck me. He set his spoon down. Yes, and you have been at the hospital every day since. Yes. She held his gaze steadily. Why? He looked at her. The same answer I gave your father, because I was responsible, and because... He stopped. She waited. Because I found that I did not want to leave, he said finally. The table was quiet for a moment. Gloria reached for the serving dish with the complete serenity of a woman who had decided to let a silence be what it was. Emmanuel looked at his rice. Adaeze nodded once, slowly, with the precise consideration she gave everything. Then she asked him to pass the pepper soup. He came back the next day, not with a purpose, not with a constructed reason. He came the way people come when they have run out of excuses to not go somewhere and have decided to stop inventing them. He arrived at the Okafor home in Namgu on a Sunday morning with a bag of produce from the Jagalchi market because his driver had mentioned that Gloria Okafor had admired a particular variety of dried fish at their previous meal, and he had thought, I can do something about that. Gloria opened the door. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. She stepped aside without a word and let him into her kitchen. He did not know how to cook. He stood in the corner of Gloria Okafor's kitchen and learned things about dried fish and palm oil and the correct ratio of locust beans in agouti soup and said very little and absorbed everything. Gloria narrated as she cooked, not to teach him specifically, just because Gloria Okafor narrated everything. She moved through the world accompanied by her own commentary on it, and this was one of the things that made her, as Adaeze would later explain, the single most vivid person in any room she entered. Adaeze came in from the sitting room and found him standing at the kitchen counter, watching her mother cook with the expression of a man who had never in his adult life stood in a domestic kitchen and was recalibrating his understanding of something. She leaned against the doorframe. You came back. He looked at her. Yes. She said nothing further. She went and sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and worked on her research while her mother cooked and the man everyone in Busan knew as dangerous stood in the corner of their kitchen, learning what went into agouti soup. And this became the shape of things for several weeks. Not a courtship exactly. Not yet. but a presence. He appeared consistently. He brought things the family needed, not showily but practically. The broken gate latch fixed. A car arranged when Dr. Okafor had an early appointment. The specific brand of tea that was difficult to source in Busan that Gloria had mentioned wanting once. He never made a production of any of it. He did it the way a man does things when he is genuinely interested in the well-being of the people he is doing them for, not when he is building a case for himself. Adaeze watched all of this from a careful distance. She was not ready to stop watching, as she had been through enough to know that patterns needed time to establish themselves, and that the first few weeks of any behavior were insufficient evidence of the whole. She had a doctorate in ethics. She applied it. What she observed across those weeks was a man who was not performing. He did not have the particular qualities she had learned to recognize in people who were presenting rather than being. That slight gloss, that awareness of the audience. Kwon Jae-hyun moved through her family's home as if he had simply decided to be in it, without staging any of it for effect. He sat with her father after dinner and talked about shipping logistics and infrastructure with the focused intelligence of a man who had built his knowledge of those subjects from the ground up. When he listened to her mother discuss Ama Ata Idu with genuine attention and occasional pushback, which Gloria respected above all things, she had no patience for people who agreed with her simply to be agreeable. And with Adaeze herself, he was careful. Not distant, but careful. The distinction was important. He did not crowd her. He did not press toward a conclusion. He gave her room the way you give a person room when you understand what they have just been through, and you respect that the pace of what comes next must be theirs to set. One evening, they were sitting on the small balcony of her parents' home after dinner, both with tea, the Busan lights below them, and the sea somewhere in the dark beyond the city's glow. She had been reading something on her phone and set it down. "I need to ask you something honestly," she said. He turned to look at her. "What is this?" she said. "What are you doing here?" Not accusingly. She had too much precision with language for accusation to be her default. She was simply asking for the thing to be named because she did not know how to exist in a situation she had not accurately categorized. He was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the dark city. "I am a man," he said carefully, "who has spent 20 years building things that have value in specific contexts and none at all in others." He turned back to her. "I have never sat in a kitchen learning to cook. I have never come back to a house because I wanted to be in it, rather than because I had business in it." He held her gaze. "I do not know exactly what I am doing here, Adaeze. I only know that I find I cannot stop doing it." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "I am not a simple situation," she said, "and I am in the middle of a divorce. I have work that is the center of my life, and that will remain the center of my life. I carry things from what happened that I have not finished processing." She paused. "And I am someone who requires honesty above everything. I have no capacity for anything less." He nodded slowly. "I understand all of that." She looked at the city below. "I am going to need time. I am not going anywhere." She looked back at him. Her expression was not soft exactly. It was the expression of a woman who was choosing to proceed with her eyes fully open, which was the only way she knew how to proceed with anything. "All right," she said. It was enough. For now it was entirely enough. The divorce from Lee Jun-seo was finalized 3 months later, but he had filed without complication. His attorney moved efficiently, and the proceedings were unchallenged because Adaeze had decided, on the advice of her own counsel, to take what she had brought into the marriage and nothing she had not. This was not generosity toward Jun-seo. It was clarity about herself. She did not want anything from that apartment. She wanted to be free of it cleanly. What she had not known, and what became clear during the proceedings, was that Jun-seo had been systematically misappropriating funds from a joint investment account they had opened in the second year of marriage. Funds that had largely been contributed by Adaeze's research grants and her consultancy work. His attorneys tried to contest the documentation. Her attorneys produced spreadsheets separately, and Adaeze would not learn the full details of this until much later. A number of Jun-seo's business associates had quietly and simultaneously begun distancing themselves from his professional network in the weeks following the incident. Several contracts had been withdrawn without explanation, One major shipping client had terminated their arrangement by letter. The reasons given were vague. The timing was not. Kwon Jae-hyun, when asked about this by director Woo, had said only, "Business associations have natural durations," and had returned to his figures. The months that followed were the kind of months that require both grief and rebuilding simultaneously, which is the most tiring kind of living. Adaeze went back to her research. So she sat with her papers and her ethics frameworks and her data, and she was grateful for the work the way she was always grateful for it, because it asked her to be her most rigorous self, and being her most rigorous self had always been her best way through difficult things. She was also, in this period, learning to live inside her own name again. Adaeze Okafor, the person she had been before a marriage, had attached another name to her and altered the shape of her days. There was grief in the return to herself. She had not entered that marriage lightly, and the fact that it had been constructed on a false foundation did not erase the years she had genuinely lived in it. She had loved someone. The love had been real, even if the person receiving it had been performing. She allowed herself to grieve that. She gave the grief its full due without drowning in it, which was the only healthy way she had ever known to process loss. Her mother helped. Gloria was, among her many qualities, someone who understood grief with the scholar's rigorous intelligence and the mother's practical tenderness. She did not rush her daughter through it. She also did not allow her to construct a home inside it. She knew, with the precision of a woman who had spent a career studying how stories end, that the middle of a hard chapter was not the last page. She and Kwon Jae-hyun fell into each other slowly and with full consciousness. Long evenings on the balcony, walks along Haeundae Beach on Sunday mornings before the crowds arrived, conversations that were genuinely surprising. He had been educated in ways that were entirely outside any formal institution, which gave him a particular kind of intelligence that was structural rather than disciplinary, and she found it consistently interesting to talk to someone whose way of thinking was so unlike her own and yet so precisely engaged. He told her one evening about where he had come from. A district of Busan that did not appear in tourist guides. A father who left when he was 9. The particular education the streets provide when there is no other available. The choices that compound, each one making the next one smaller, until the range of available futures narrows to almost nothing. And then the slow, brutal, costly process of building something back from that narrowed place. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You are not ashamed of it," she said. He looked at her. "No." "Good," she said simply. "You should not be." He looked at her for a long moment after that, the kind of look that does not have a convenient word for what it is. Somewhere between recognition and gratitude, and something deeper than both. Her father had a conversation with him one Saturday afternoon that Adaeze was not present for. She learned about it later from Gloria, who had been present for all of it from the kitchen doorway, in the way that Gloria was present for everything that happened in that home. Emmanuel had said, "I know what your reputation is in this city. I am not a naive man." He had said it without hostility, just with the directness of a doctor, which was the directness of a man who had spent his life in rooms where clarity was more important than comfort. "I have one question for you, not about your business, about my daughter." Kwon Jae-hyun had waited. When things become difficult, and they will, because things always do, what will you do? He had not answered immediately. Gloria had said later that the pause was the most reassuring part. A man who answers that question quickly is performing. A man who sits with it is taking it seriously. He had said, "I will stay." He said it without elaboration. He said it the way true things are said, not decorated, not defended, just stated. Emmanuel had nodded. "Then I have nothing further to ask you." He asked her to marry him on an ordinary evening. They were at the kitchen table, her parents' kitchen, where so much of what had become real between them had happened. And she was working on revisions to a paper, and he was going through correspondence, and Gloria was at the stove pretending not to listen. He set down his phone and looked at her across the table with those dark, direct eyes and said, "I want to ask you something." She looked up from her laptop. He did not produce a ring immediately. He said, "I know what you have been through. I know the word marriage carries weight for you that it did not carry before. I am not asking you to forget that weight or to pretend it does not exist. I am asking you, knowing all of it, whether you will marry me, because I intend to spend however long it takes earning what that word should mean. From the stove, Gloria Okafor made a sound that she immediately converted into vigorous stirring. Adaeze looked at this man. She looked at him the way she looked at everything that mattered. Fully, without protective distance. Where with the complete engagement of a person who had decided to be present for the thing in front of her. She thought about her father's words from years ago, before any of this. Watch how a man treats you when things are inconvenient. That is where his character lives. She had watched. She had taken evidence. She had processed it with everything her mind and her heart could bring to bear. Yes, she said. She said it clearly and without hesitation, the way she said everything she was certain of. Gloria set down her stirring spoon and turned around, and her face was doing something entirely at odds with the sternly composed expression she had been attempting to maintain. Emmanuel appeared in the doorway. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the man across the table from her. He looked at his wife. He removed his reading glasses. He folded them carefully and said, I am going to need a moment. The wedding was in spring, not large. They had both decided that, independently and without discussion, which was one of the things that confirmed to both of them that they were making a correct decision. Gloria wore yellow. Emmanuel walked his daughter down the aisle and did not apologize for the tears. Adaeze wore white, which she had chosen because she owed no sentiment to its implications and because she liked the way it looked. Director Wu sat in the third row and spent the entire ceremony with the expression of a man who was trying to appear impassive and failing completely. As for Lee Junseo, Busan is a city that remembers. The financial irregularities in his company accounts had grown considerably more visible over the preceding months, and as such things do when the architecture supporting them quietly withdraws. His most significant business relationships had dissolved. The fraud investigation had expanded. By spring, he was living in a significantly smaller apartment in a significantly less prominent part of the city, and the woman he had brought into his home the night he dismantled his marriage had long since moved on to someone more useful. He was not something Adaeze thought about. She had closed that chapter with the same completeness with which she approached everything, deliberately, thoroughly, without leaving doors open that did not need to be open. She had work to do. A research position she had accepted at Busan National University that was exactly what her abilities deserved. And a husband who sat across kitchen tables from her and gave her room and never once asked her to be smaller than she was. A mother who cooked and narrated and loved at full volume. A father who showed up to everything and meant every word he said. A life, finally, that held the full weight of who she was without cracking under it. The Busan Sea in spring is particular. Not the gray and muscular thing it is in October, but clear and light-struck and specific in its blues. Adaeze ran along Hyundai Beach on Saturday mornings before the crowds arrived, her headphones in and her research questions working through her mind the way they always worked through her mind when she gave her body something to do. One Saturday she was stretching on the breakwater after her run when she felt the presence beside her. She did not have to look. You ran the whole thing today, he said. She had made him run it with her 3 times before he had established that early Saturday mornings were not a negotiable boundary. She had respected that entirely. She looked at him. You came to watch me run. He looked out at the sea. I came to be here when you finished. She looked at the sea too. The light on it was something this morning, one of those Busan mornings that asked nothing of you and gave you everything. She thought about the night on the pavement outside the Hyundai apartment, the cold and the sea smell, and the way she had stood there in the ruins of her choices and tried to know that she could stand without falling. She had been able to stand. She had always been able to stand. But standing beside someone who chose to be there, that was a different thing entirely. Well, that was the thing she had given up hope of understanding, and now she understood it. She reached out and took his hand. His tattooed, complicated, faithful hand. The sea kept doing what seas do. And the woman who had been thrown out of her own home at midnight had found her way, through wreckage and cold, and the strange mercy of a near miss on a dark street, to the exact place she was supposed to be. She had always known she would,